My wife stopped recognizing our grandchildren 18 months ago. Last Thursday, I drove her through the snow to see a new internist at St. Aclas, Michael's Hospital in downtown Toronto. When our son excused himself to answer a call in the hallway, the doctor's face went pale as he leaned across his desk and whispered urgently, "Sir, you need to get your wife out of that house tonight. Away from your son. Do you understand me?" Before he could say another word, our son stepped back into the office, his phone still pressed against his ear, his eyes sweeping over us with that same worried expression he'd been wearing for nearly 2 years. I'd be truly grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which part of Canada you're watching from and what the weather's doing right now. That doctor's shaking whisper changed the entire course of our lives. But let me take you back to where this nightmare really started. My name is Gordon Whitfield. I'm 67 years old, a retired millwright from Hamilton who spent 42 years keeping steel mills running along the lake. My wife Eleanor is 64, a former kindergarten teacher who could calm any crying child with just her voice. Back in our best years, she'd come home from school with paint on her sleeves and stories about every single student, remembering their names, their favorite colors, what their mothers had packed for lunch. These days, she can't remember what I made her for breakfast an hour ago. Some mornings, she looks at our wedding photo on the dresser and asks me who those young people are. The decline crept in slowly. Misplaced reading glasses. The same story told 3 times in one afternoon. I told myself it was just getting older. The way we all fog up around the edges. Then came the Saturday morning when Eleanor stood in our kitchen holding her mother's butter tart recipe card, the one she'd made for every Christmas since 1983. And she looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said she couldn't remember what to do with it. That's the moment I knew something was genuinely wrong. Our son, Bradley, insisted we see a specialist. He drove up from Oakville nearly every weekend, his leased Audi gleaming in our driveway, his wife Monique trailing behind him with designer handbags and that tight, rehearsed smile she'd perfected over the years. Bradley had turned 41 that spring, and somewhere along the line, he'd stopped being the boy who'd built balsa wood airplanes on our kitchen table and become someone I didn't quite recognize. He'd become Eleanor's primary caregiver by default. I still took on contract work for the mill, consulting on equipment retrofits that required me to travel across the country sometimes for weeks at a time. When Eleanor started forgetting to turn off the stove, Bradley stepped in so smoothly it felt like a blessing, but there was something behind his eyes that I couldn't quite put my finger on. A cold calculation when he thought nobody was watching. He'd photographed the oil paintings Eleanor's father had collected. He'd ask about the deed to the cottage on Georgian Bay. He'd mention the word trust fund more than any son should. "Dad, you and Mom aren't getting any younger," he'd say over Sunday dinner, cutting his roast beef with surgical precision. "We need to think practically. Power of attorney. Joint accounts. What if you had a stroke tomorrow? Who'd handle the bills?" I always changed the subject. Those conversations made my stomach turn in a way I couldn't explain. Dr. Harjit Singh was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in his late 40s, with kind brown eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Eleanor at ease. He'd been recommended by our family doctor, apparently one of the top internists in the entire Greater Toronto area. He ran through the standard assessments with both Bradley and me in the room. Memory questions, coordination tests, simple arithmetic. Eleanor struggled with increasing visible distress, her hands twisting the hem of her cardigan. "Mrs. Whitfield, can you tell me what year it is?" "It's 2021. "Isn't it? Or maybe 2022. My chest tightened. It was 2024. It was nearly Christmas. We'd just watched the Grey Cup together 3 weeks earlier, though she'd asked me 4 times who was playing. "And who is our Prime Minister?" Eleanor furrowed her brow. "Chrétien. Is it still Chrétien?" "Doctor." Singh made careful notes, his pen moving quickly. "Mr. Whitfield, I'd like to order some additional blood work. This cognitive decline is progressing more rapidly than I'd typically expect for her age and presentation. He glanced sideways at Bradley. I'd also like a complete list of every medication and supplement she's taking. Drug interactions can sometimes mimic or accelerate symptoms like these. Mom barely takes anything, Bradley said quickly. Perhaps too quickly. Just her blood pressure pills, a statin, and some memory supplements I pick up for her. Who manages her pill organizer? I do, Bradley said. I drive up from Oakville every Sunday and fill the whole week's worth. Mom gets confused with pill bottles, so we keep it simple. Something passed across Dr. Singh's face then. A flicker of alarm so quick I nearly missed it. Before I could ask anything, Bradley's phone buzzed in his pocket and he stood up abruptly. Sorry. It's the office. I'll just be a minute. He stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind him. The moment that door clicked shut, Dr. Singh's entire demeanor transformed. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles went white. Mr. Whitfield, he whispered urgently, you need to get your wife out of that house tonight. Away from your son. Do you understand me? My heart started pounding in my chest. What on earth are you talking about? The pattern of her decline, the specific gaps in her memory, the way she's presenting. I've seen this twice before in my career. Certain pharmaceutical compounds, when administered to elderly patients over long periods, can produce symptoms virtually identical to early-onset dementia. They cause real cognitive impairment. But crucially, in most cases the damage is reversible if we catch it in time. The fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright. Doctor, what are you saying to me? I'm saying your wife may not have dementia at all. She may be being... The door swung open. Bradley filled the frame. His phone lowered, his eyes darting between us with that sharp assessment I'd started noticing more often. Sorry about that. Everything all right in here? Doctor, the drive back to Hamilton felt like it took a lifetime. Snow was falling in those thick, wet flakes that Ontario specializes in every December. And I kept glancing at Bradley in my rearview mirror. His silver Audi trailing us down the QEW. Eleanor sat quietly in the passenger seat, humming an old Anne Murray tune under her breath, completely unaware that our entire world had just tilted on its axis. Back at our house on Mountain Brow Boulevard, the one we'd bought in 1987 when the kids were still in elementary school, Bradley came inside as if nothing had happened. He went straight to the kitchen where he kept Eleanor's weekly pill dispenser, a plastic organizer with 7 little compartments. I watched from the doorway as he methodically opened bottles and dropped tablets into each slot, his movements practiced and precise. Mom, time for your evening meds, he called out cheerfully. Eleanor shuffled in wearing the cream-colored cardigan I'd bought her at the Eaton Center 30 years ago, the one with little embroidered maple leaves along the cuffs. She took the pills without a second glance, trusting her son completely, the way she'd trusted him since the day he was born. The sight made something turn over in my gut. I'll put the kettle on for tea, Bradley announced. Dad, why don't you help Mom get comfortable in the family room? As I guided Eleanor to her favorite recliner, fragments of the past 18 months began sliding into place like puzzle pieces, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Before Eleanor's decline, Bradley visited maybe once every 6 weeks, usually dragging himself up the highway for Christmas Eve or Thanksgiving. But starting right around when Eleanor began forgetting things, his visits had jumped to weekly, then twice weekly. I'd been so grateful. What son wouldn't want to spend time with his ailing mother? Now, watching him move through my kitchen with that practiced familiarity, I remembered other things too. How he'd insisted on handling all the medications personally. How he'd grown irritated when I'd suggested switching family doctors. How he'd pushed me to take on those long consulting contracts with Stelco in Saltstein, Marie, reassuring everyone that he and Monique had things handled back home. The financial mess had started around the same time, though I hadn't connected it then. Bradley had invested heavily in some crypto scheme through a buddy from his business school days. He and Monique had refinanced their Oakville house twice. I remembered Monique crying at our dining room table last Easter, mascara running down her cheeks, telling me they were $300,000 in the hole and the bank was threatening foreclosure. I'd offered to help them, but Bradley had waved it off with false cheerfulness. "We'll figure it out. Dad, don't you worry about us." Now, watching him move through our kitchen, I was starting to understand exactly how he'd planned to figure it out. "I'm going to use the washroom upstairs," Bradley called out after settling Eleanor with her tea. Long drive back to Oakville ahead of me. The moment I heard water running in the pipes overhead, something compelled me toward his leather messenger bag. It sat on one of the kitchen stools where he'd tossed it when we came in. My hands trembled as I unzipped the main compartment. I'd never once gone through my son's belongings in his entire life. Not when he was 15, and I suspected he was sneaking beer. Not when he was 22 and I worried about his choice of girlfriend. Inside, I found the usual things: a laptop, a leather wallet, a half-eaten granola bar, but tucked into a zippered interior pocket, wrapped carefully inside a folded cloth handkerchief, was a small amber pill bottle. The label had been scraped almost completely off, but I could make out a few letters and one absolutely critical phrase that made my blood run cold. Acipromazine. For veterinary use only. For veterinary use only. I stood there staring at that bottle, my old engineer's brain processing what I was holding with slow, horrible clarity. This wasn't a medication for humans. This was something you gave to anxious dogs and horses. Something that had absolutely no business being anywhere near my Eleanor. The water was still running in the pipes upstairs. Eleanor was humming contentedly in the family room. Some old song from when our kids were small. And in my shaking hands was proof that my own son, the boy I'd taught to tie fishing lures on the dock at Balsam Lake, had been methodically drugging his own mother for over a year and a half. The next morning, before the sun had even come up properly over Hamilton Mountain, I drove myself down to the Hamilton Central Library. I paced outside in the cold, my breath fogging in the morning air, waiting for them to unlock the doors. Sleep had been impossible. That amber bottle had haunted every corner of my thoughts. A young librarian named Priya Kapoor was setting up the reference desk when I came in. She'd helped me research engineering patents a few years back. And she remembered me. "Mr. Whitfield, you're here early. Priya, I need your help. I need to research a medication. Acipromazine. Veterinary grade." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but bless her professionalism. She didn't ask a single question. Within 20 minutes, we'd pulled up medical databases, pharmacology journals, and case studies from the College of Physicians and Surgeons. What I read made the library spin around me. Acepromazine was a phenothiazine tranquilizer used primarily to sedate anxious dogs, cats, and horses. In humans, especially elderly humans, it caused profound drowsiness, confusion, memory impairment, and crucially, with prolonged exposure, symptoms that looked exactly like vascular dementia. The effects were dose-dependent, and thankfully, according to every paper I read, largely reversible if the administration stopped in time. This article says chronic exposure can cause permanent cognitive damage, Priya said quietly, sliding the journal across to me. "Mr. Whitfield, are you okay? Is someone you love taking this? Someone very dear to me?" I said. How quickly does recovery begin after discontinuation? Most of these case studies show noticeable improvement within 72 hours. Significant recovery over 4 to 6 weeks. I printed everything and drove straight home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my old arthritic knuckles ached. If Eleanor was being drugged, then removing the drug should prove it. Bradley wouldn't be back until Sunday to refill the pill organizer. I had 4 days. That afternoon, I examined Eleanor's pill dispenser carefully under the workbench lamp in the garage. 7 compartments. 4 pills each. I recognized the legitimate prescriptions. The Ramipril for her blood pressure. The atorvastatin for her cholesterol. But 2 others were unfamiliar. Small gray-blue tablets that didn't match anything in the pharmacy's printout I kept in the kitchen drawer, using the same magnifying glass I'd used to read engineering blueprints for 4 decades. I found the tiny imprint on each pill. Polna 25 acepromazine, 25 milligrams. A dose meant for a medium-sized dog. I replaced them with vitamin D capsules of nearly identical color and size. My hands were steadier than they should have been, as if I was diffusing a device in a factory shutdown. That evening, I walked next door to see my old friend, Fergus McLennan. Fergus was 74, a retired OPP sergeant who'd spent 35 years working in North York. He was out salting his driveway when I came over. Fergus. Hypothetically, if a man discovered his own family was poisoning his wife, what's the smartest way to handle it? Fergus set down his salt bucket slowly. Hypothetically, Gordon, hypothetically, get the evidence first. Document everything with dates and times. Don't confront anybody until you've got ironclad proof. He studied my face carefully. And Gordon, people who do things like that, when they feel cornered, they don't stop at one victim. You understand me. That evening, Eleanor took her modified pills without suspicion. I watched her carefully, looking for any sign that my theory held water. 26 hours later, I was reading the Hamilton Spectator at the kitchen table when Eleanor appeared in the doorway with an expression I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. She was holding the crossword puzzle from yesterday's paper, and she'd filled in half the clues in her familiar looping handwriting. "Gordon," she said, and something in her voice made me lower the paper. Her eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in months. Focused. Present. Why do I feel so sharp this morning, 48 hours without that hidden medication? And my Eleanor was coming back to me, not because anything about her had changed, but because I was finally seeing her again after nearly 2 years of watching her fade behind a chemical fog. By Thursday morning, she was up before me, which hadn't happened since sometime in 2023. I came downstairs to find her cooking bacon and eggs, humming along to CBC Radio 2, wearing her old blue housecoat like no time had passed at all. "Good morning, handsome," she said, turning from the stove with a smile that lit up her whole face. "I made your favorite, the eggs with the extra cheese." "Sit down." I sat at our kitchen table, the same one where we'd eaten thousands of meals over 4 decades of marriage, and I could hardly speak. "How are you feeling today?" "Ellie," she paused, considering the question with genuine thought. "Different. Like I've been walking around inside a heavy fog. And this morning someone finally opened a window." Her smile faded into concern. "Gordon, something has been wrong with me. Hasn't it for a long time?" "Yes." "Love, something's been very wrong." "What do I remember?" She frowned, placing a plate in front of me. "Pieces. Fragments. I remember feeling terrified all the time, like I was slipping away from myself and couldn't find the words to tell anyone." Her voice broke. "I remember you looking at me with such sadness in your eyes, and I couldn't do anything about it." The woman sitting across from me was my Eleanor, the kindergarten teacher who'd taught over 400 children to read, the grandmother who used to bake butter tarts from her mother's recipe every Christmas Eve. She'd been there the entire time. Trapped inside a chemical prison, I kept trying to tell you something was wrong, she whispered, reaching across the table for my hand. But the words wouldn't come out right. I'd start a sentence and forget what I was saying. I felt like I was drowning. Gordon, drowning in plain daylight. And no one could hear me calling for help. My throat closed up completely. "You're not drowning anymore." "Ellie." "No. I'm not. But how? A car pulled into our driveway. Silver Audi. Bradley's car. He wasn't supposed to be here until Sunday. That's odd, Eleanor said, looking out the window. Bradley's early set. I watched our son step out of his car, moving with his usual purposeful stride. He had his own key. In about 10 seconds, he'd walk through our front door and see Eleanor standing in our kitchen. Alert. Coherent. Aware. Ellie. Listen to me carefully. I said quickly. I need you to act confused. Forgetful. The way you've been acting for the last year and a half. Just for a few minutes. Can you do that for me? Why would I? The front door opened. Boots on the mat. Mom, Dad, I brought Tim Hortons. Eleanor's eyes widened. She understood something was terribly wrong without knowing what. She nodded at me. Just slightly. And then her face went slack. She let her shoulders droop. She lowered herself into the chair beside me. Staring blankly at the table, Bradley stepped into the kitchen holding a tray of coffees and a bag of Timbits. He took in the scene, his eyes moving from the cooked breakfast to Eleanor's slumped posture. To my face. Something flickered across his features. Uncertainty. Morning. Dad? Mom? You're up early? He set the coffee down carefully. You feeling okay today? Mom Eleanor mumbled something incoherent and stared at her folded hands. Dad? Mom looks tired? Maybe she should have her morning pills and go lie down for a bit. He moved toward the counter where the pill organizer sat. I stood up faster than my knees liked. She doesn't need those pills today. Bradley's hand froze halfway to the dispenser. Dad. Mom needs her medication. Doctor. Abbasi specifically said, what medication? Bradley? I stepped between him and the counter. Tell me exactly what you've been putting in your mother's pill organizer every Sunday for the last 18 months. Something shifted in his face. The concerned sun mask slipped. I watched it happen in real time. Her prescriptions. Dad. The Ramipril. The statin. The memory supplements I picked up from that naturopath in Mississauga. Memory supplements. I pulled the amber bottle from my sweater pocket. The one I'd photographed from every angle. The one I'd had analyzed by an independent pharmacist in Burlington who'd written me a 2-page report. Supplements like this. The color drained out of my son's face so completely, I thought he might pass out right there in our kitchen. For a long moment, the only sound was Eleanor's sharp intake of breath beside me as she read the label over my shoulder. Where did you get that? Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. From the inside pocket of your messenger bag. The same bag you kept close to you all through Dr. Singh's office. Atsipromazine. For veterinary use only. Tell me why you're carrying a horse tranquilizer around with you. So? Dad. You don't. I understand perfectly. You've been drugging your mother for a year and a half. Systematically poisoning her to make her look incompetent so you could position yourself as the indispensable caregiver. So you could get power of attorney. So you could move us into a care facility and sell this house out from under us. Bradley collapsed into a kitchen chair as if his legs had finally given out. For a moment I thought he might actually break down. But then, slowly, his expression hardened into something calculating. Something I'd never seen on my own son's face before. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He said quietly. It started small. Just a quarter tablet. Just to help her sleep through the night so you wouldn't have to worry when you were in Sotsti. Marie. Just to make her more manageable. Manageable. Eleanor's voice came out low and horrified. I'm your mother. Bradley. Not one of your goddamn dogs. Mom. You don't understand. The money. Monique and I. We lost everything. The crypto collapse. The mortgage. The line of credit. We're $400,000 in the hole. The bank is going to foreclose on the Oakville house in January. He looked between us with something like desperation. I saw what this place is worth now. I saw what the cottage is worth. I thought if Mom just needed more care, If she just needed to be somewhere else, we could work something out. Sell the cottage. Maybe, just to get us through until the market came back. So you decided to create the need, I said, my voice like iron. You decided to steal your own mother's mind. I was being careful. I researched it. I calculated the dose. I was never going to hurt her permanently. 18 months. Bradley. Eleanor's voice cracked. You stole 18 months from me. From our grandchildren. From your father. From this marriage. And then I watched it happen. I watched my son's face change from the frightened boy he'd briefly become back into something cold. He straightened his back. He wiped his eyes quickly. Dad, look at yourself. You're accusing your only son of trying to kill your wife based on a bottle you claim you found in my bag. You've been under tremendous stress. Monique and I have been worried about your own cognitive decline for months. I've already spoken with a family lawyer about guardianship options. For both of you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He set it on our kitchen table. The Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee takes elder abuse accusations very seriously. Dad, especially when they're made against a devoted son by parents who are clearly both showing signs of diminished capacity. The threat hung in our kitchen like poison gas. He'd been preparing for this moment. He'd already planned for the possibility of being caught. And he'd constructed a story that would paint me as a paranoid old man making delusional accusations against his loving son. Get out of my house. Bradley. Dad. You're not. Get out of my house, I roared. Louder than I'd raised my voice. In 30 years. You don't have a key anymore. You don't have permission to cross this property line. And if I ever see your car in my driveway again without an invitation, I'll have the Hamilton Police Service drag you off in handcuffs. Bradley gathered his things with trembling hands. At the doorway, he turned back one final time. This isn't over. Dad, she's still my mother. A judge will see the truth. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Eleanor and me standing in the wreckage of what had once been our family. The following morning, I sat in the downtown office of Cordelia Beaufort. A criminal lawyer, Fergus, had recommended. She was sharp as a surgical blade. A woman in her early 50s who'd spent a decade as a crown attorney before going into private practice. Mr. Whitfield. What you're describing constitutes serious criminal charges under the criminal code. Aggravated assault. Administering a noxious substance. Potentially attempted murder. She tapped her pen against her legal pad. But we need evidence that'll hold up. Medical confirmation. Financial motive documented in writing. Expert toxicology. That afternoon, Eleanor and I sat in a clinic at McMaster University Medical Center while a phlebotomist drew blood for a comprehensive toxicology panel. Dr. Singh met with us the next morning. His expression grave. Mrs. Whitfield, your blood work shows significant levels of acetpromazine metabolites, consistent with regular dosing over an extended period. The concentration suggests approximately 25 milligrams administered daily for somewhere between 12 and 20 months. He turned to me. This is systematic. Deliberate poisoning. And Mr. Whitfield, I want you to know, I've already filed a mandatory report with the Office of the Chief Coroner, and Children's Aid isn't the relevant body here, but I've notified the appropriate authorities. Elder abuse protocols require it. My phone buzzed. It was a text from our daughter Rosalind, who'd flown in from Calgary the night before after I'd called her and told her everything. I'd waited to call until I had evidence, because I wasn't sure at first whether she might side with Bradley. She'd walked through our front door with red eyes and held her mother for 20 minutes before saying a word. Detective Yuki Tanaka from Hamilton Police Service arrived at our house that afternoon, with 2 uniformed constables. She reviewed everything. The medical reports, the amber bottle with Bradley's fingerprints on it, which the forensic lab had already processed. Dr. Singh's written testimony, Bradley's bank records, which showed a pattern of desperate withdrawals and a second mortgage application the previous spring. Mr. Whitfield, we have more than enough for charges of aggravated assault and administering a noxious substance. The Crown will likely also pursue attempted murder given the duration and the vulnerability of the victim. This is not a borderline case. My heart hammered against my ribs. What happens now? An arrest warrant has already been issued. We'll pick him up tomorrow morning at his home in Oakville. I thought about the little boy who used to ride on my shoulders at the Hamilton Tiger Cats games. The teenager who'd cried when our golden retriever Barley had died. The young man I'd walked down the aisle toward Monique at the Royal Botanical Gardens. Fergus placed his weathered hand on my shoulder. Garden, you're not destroying your son. Your son destroyed himself. You're protecting your wife. That's what a husband does. Detective Tanaka closed her notebook quietly. Mr. Whitfield, I know this is the hardest thing you've ever done. 2 mornings later, as Eleanor stood in our backyard garden, pruning the dormant rose bushes for the first time in 2 years, I heard through our kitchen radio that my son had been arrested without incident at his home in Oakville. His wife Monique had been charged as an accomplice the same afternoon. After police found banking records that showed she'd been aware of the asapromazine purchases and had helped conceal them through veterinary supply orders placed in her name, Bradley never went to trial. 2 weeks after his arrest, with the evidence overwhelming, his defense lawyer negotiated a plea bargain. He pled guilty to aggravated assault and administering a noxious substance. The attempted murder charge was withdrawn in exchange for full cooperation. At his sentencing hearing 3 months later at the John Sopinka Courthouse in Hamilton, Justice Harinder Dillon, a stern woman who'd been on the bench for over 20 years, delivered her ruling in a courtroom so silent you could hear the heating ducts clicking. Mr. Whitfield, you committed one of the most calculated and cold-hearted betrayals that has come before this court in my entire career. You systematically poisoned your own mother, stole nearly 2 years of her cognitive life, and nearly destroyed a marriage of 41 years for the sake of your own financial greed. This court sentences you to 18 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will pay full restitution for all medical expenses. You are permanently barred from any inheritance from your parents' estates. A lifetime restraining order is imposed, protecting both Gordon and Eleanor Whitfield. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Eleanor broke down and wept into my shoulder. He's still my baby. She whispered over and over. He's still my baby boy. I held my wife as tightly as I could, feeling the weight of everything we'd lost and everything we'd somehow managed to save. 6 months later, spring came early to Hamilton, the snow melting off Mountain Brow Boulevard earlier than anyone expected. I found Eleanor in her garden again, tending the rose bushes she'd stared at blankly for nearly 2 years, pruning with the remembered expertise of a woman who'd won neighborhood garden awards twice in the 90s. The soil's good this year. Garden, she said, her eyes bright and clear. We'll have beautiful blooms for Canada Day. The transformation still amazed me every single morning. Her memory had returned almost completely. Her sense of humor had come back. She was volunteering again at the Literacy Center at the Hamilton Public Library, reading to children the way she'd done for 34 years before she'd retired. I'd finally turned down all my remaining consulting contracts. At 67, I'd learned there was no steel mill in this country more important than the woman across from me at the breakfast table. I lost 1.5 years with you. I told her one evening as we sat on our back deck watching the sun set over the city, I'm not losing another day. Rosalind had relocated her whole family from Calgary to Burlington to be closer to us. Her guilt over not having seen what was happening had transformed into a fierce protectiveness. She visited every Sunday with her husband and our 2 grandchildren. And Eleanor remembered every single one of their names now. We visited Bradley exactly twice at the Joyceville Institution near Kingston. He looked diminished in his gray prison uniform, worn down by the reality of what he'd done. I see Mom's face every night when I close my eyes. He told us through tears during the second visit. I see her sitting at the kitchen table looking at that bottle, That image will be with me until the day I die. Eleanor had reached across the table and held his hand. I forgive you. Bradley, I don't understand what you did, and I'll never forget it. But you are still my son, and I forgive you. Because that's what a mother does. That was 9 months ago. We haven't been back since. Fergus continued to be our rock, stopping by in the evenings to split a beer and share his quiet wisdom on our back deck. The tragedy isn't that you trusted your son, Gordon, he said one July evening. The tragedy is that he chose to exploit that trust instead of honoring it. I'd started speaking at senior centers across Ontario about the warning signs of elder abuse. The response had overwhelmed me. Dozens of people across Hamilton, Burlington, St. Catharines, and Niagara Falls had come forward with similar stories. Stories of adult children slowly draining bank accounts, of caregivers who controlled all the medications, of elderly parents being isolated from friends and other family members. I always ended my talks the same way, by giving out the Canadian Elder Abuse Prevention Helpline number and reminding people that sometimes the most dangerous people in an elderly person's life are the ones who claim to love them most. As I sit on my back deck writing this, watching Eleanor water her tomato plants in the evening light, I'm struck by how much can change when a person simply chooses to see the truth. Our family will never be what it was. We'll always carry the scars of this betrayal and the grief of losing our son to his own terrible choices. But we're alive. We're together. And we're using what happened to us to protect other families from walking the same dark road. Looking back, I realize how completely blind trust almost destroyed everything I held most dear. Don't make my mistake. Don't ignore the warning signs when someone you love starts changing in ways that don't quite add up. I trusted completely because Bradley was my son. But the hardest lesson I've learned isn't about recognizing poison in a pill organizer. It's about recognizing when love has become manipulation, when care has become control, when a caregiver suddenly becomes indispensable while everyone else gets gently pushed away. I spent 18 months watching my wife disappear while every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. Doctor. Singh's whispered warning came from a doctor brave enough to risk his career on what he believed was happening in front of him. I almost missed it because I couldn't imagine my own son being capable of such calculated cruelty. When medications appear that nobody can explain, when someone insists on controlling every medical decision, when a single family member becomes suddenly essential while siblings and friends are pushed aside, pay attention. These aren't coincidences. These are warning signs written in a language we'd rather not learn to read. Trust, but verify. Love, but stay watchful. And please remember this, because it may save someone you love. The most dangerous betrayals often come wrapped in the language of care. If this story reached something inside you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of Canadians looking out for each other. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and keeping peace in your family? Your story might be the one that saves another family from walking this road we've traveled.